Once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Village of Bartlett Committee of the Whole meeting for December 3, 2024. I call this meeting to order, and again, ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Trustee DEYNE?
Here.
Gansey?
Here.
GUNSTEEN?
Here.
Hopkins?
Here.
LAPORTE?
Here.
SUWANSKI?
Present.
President Wallace.
Here. Once again, we start this meeting with the town hall portion of the meeting, so if anyone would like to discuss any items that are on the committee, which I think a few of you already shared your opinion about one of the items on the committee, but if anyone else would like to discuss anything that's on the committee, kindly step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Would anybody like to address the committee at this time? Is there anyone online that would like to address the committee?
No one online.
He's getting a lot better at that, John. All right. Standing committee reports. Police and Health Committee, Chairman SUWANSKI.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Police Department and the Planning and Development Services Department have been working on a solution to the parking concerns raised by many of the residents who reside in the Bartlett Green Townhomes located on Oneida Avenue, Chase Avenue, and Hale Avenue at the recent board meeting on Tuesday, November 19th, 24. On a regular basis, approximately 50 to 70 vehicles will be parked on Oneida, Chase, and Hale between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. when overnight parking is prohibited per ordinance. Residents are allowed 3 overnight parking permits per month per vehicle. However, the overnight parking issue continues to persist in this area because of the lack of available parking. The suggested amendments to Section 611-1304-8.1 residential permit parking area would provide the opportunity for residents within the residential parking permit zone to apply for an annual residential parking permit that would allow them to park their vehicles in the designated permit parking areas during overnight hours from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I can turn this over to staff. I do have a few comments and questions, but you can take this, Chief.
Thank you, Trustee SUWANSKI, and happy holidays to everybody. During the town hall portion of the last village board meeting, we heard from 9 residents who live in the area of Oneida, Chase, and Hale, who shared their challenges and concerns regarding the lack of adequate parking for the multi-unit residential properties. I mentioned during that portion of the meeting that the police department was exploring different options for the residential permit parking ordinance, particularly concerning multi-unit residential properties. So what we did is, in response, we collaborated with Planning and Development Services and GIS to not only assess the number of residential units, which there are 354 units in that area. We also took a look at the amount of adequate safe parking that would be allowed on Oneida, Chase, and Hale, which comes out to approximately 130. We also contacted the management company responsible for Bartlett Green phases 1 through 6 to see if they would be willing to accommodate the needs of their residents. They mentioned at this specific time, they don't have the budget, nor do they have any space to add any additional parking spaces for these residential units. Finally, what we did is, if you recall, we put a pause on issuing the overnight parking citations so we can monitor the situation on Oneida, Chase, and Hale, including over the Thanksgiving holiday, which, as we know, many our guests require overnight parking on the street. So with that, we are now prepared to present our recommendations to the village board to address the parking concerns raised by these residents and try to provide a reasonable, quote, reasonable and a lasting solution to the overnight parking challenges they face. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Sweeney, who will present you with our recommendation.
Thanks, Chief. Board members. All right, so what we're proposing today is an amendment to our residential permit parking ordinance that was currently in place.
Could you move the mic closer? We can't hear you back here. I'm sorry.
Really? All right, currently,
Thank you.
thank you, sir. Currently, we designate 16 spots in our metro lot for our residential permit parking. As the chief mentioned, we currently on a nightly basis have 50 to 70 cars that are parking on the streets of Chase, Hale, and Oneida. So we need to find a solution to provide these residents some relief to their parking issue. What we're recommending today is an extension of the residential parking permit program to include the streets of South Chase and South Hale between North Avenue and Oneida. That would be on one side of the street, the east side of the street. Currently, the west side of the street is already restricted parking, no parking on that side of the street. And then from Oneida, from Prospect to Elroy Avenue on the south side of the street. We have found that the road widths allow for two-way travel on those streets with those cars currently parked on the street. As mentioned in our last board meeting, over the last 3 years, we've only had 2 traffic crashes in that area. Neither were related to vehicles parked on the roadway. In order to qualify for a parking permit, it would have to be someone that lived in the Bartlett Green townhomes, which are the streets that I mentioned below. Their vehicle that they would be registering would have to register to that area. There would be a $50 application fee to account for the processing fee of the background checks that would have to be done, the stickers that would have to be made and applied. I'm going to get into the process of what we'd be doing to monitor the permit parking. But it would be a $50 one-time-a-year processing fee, and it would be done annually from January through December each calendar year. We would max, like Chief said, there's 130 spots that are on those 3 streets. Additional overflow parking is available in the Metro lot, those 16 spots, and along North Avenue. Those would not be included in the residential parking permit area, but for guest parking, if it ever became an issue, those would be additional parking spots if that became an issue. Currently,
Deputy Chief, is it 130 or 132?
it's 132 per GIS if everyone parked perfectly,
Yeah.
without any margin of error.
Yeah, however, Mayor, that does not include, per state statute and village ordinance, we need to allow for 30 feet from each intersection. So that's going to reduce some of those numbers as well,
Yep.
too. I know that was one of the concerns that Trustee SUWANSKI brought up to the village administrator,
Yep.
which wasn't included on the map, but we will take into account if this goes into effect.
Good.
Over the course of the holiday weekend, which is a busy time of year, we averaged about 70 cars parked on those 3 streets per night, and an additional about 20 that were parked on North Avenue over that course of time. So we believe that parking is sufficient. We do have a special circumstance in this area. There's 5 units on Hale that are afforded no parking whatsoever. So in that area, they have an average of 2.0 spots per household. Other similar areas in town have 2.3 and 2.7 parking spots, so they are below the other averages of towns or units that have similar parking. But those 5 units on Hale would be allotted 3 spots per unit initially, and all other residents in that area would be allotted 1 spot per residence initially, and then after that initial allowing everyone the opportunity to have parking, they would be placed on a wait list for additional vehicles and then allotted up to that 132 parking spaces. We looked at some surrounding towns to kind of see what they were doing. Some towns, West Chicago and Elgin, don't provide any relief to people with these issues, but Streamwood also uses a parking permit system, the exact same as this. They do a yearly annual fee to park on the roadways in those areas, and then Hanover Park does a rotating, odd, even, one side of the street parking area, and then both of them found it effective and safe. They did not see an increase in traffic accidents or anything in those areas where they allowed the one side of the street parking. One thing with the application process, all other parking restrictions would remain in place. So just because you got a parking permit would not allow carte blanche to just park how you want to park. You still cannot park blocking driveways. You can still not park blocking fire hydrants. You can still have to move your car if there's 2 inches of snow. So all other parking enforcement would still apply, except the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. They would be exempt from that specific parking regulation. So each year when we did our renewal process, that would be a factor we would take into account if we wanted to renew the parking permit, is prior year violations of parking permit. And then additionally, all parking tickets that they would receive the year prior would have to be paid prior to being issued a permit for the next year.
And that's very similar to what Streamwood currently does for their multi-housing resident permit parking only.
Okay. Good. Couple of questions. When somebody gets a permit to park on the street, Are we doing it all by license plate, or are we doing it by a sticker or something?
It's going to be, so it's not per household, it's per vehicle. So it's one permit per vehicle, non-transferable, and it'll be a decal that has a serial number assigned to that license plate, and it'll go in the upper left-hand corner, driver's side of the windshield.
Okay.
So how many permits can people get per?
So technically, if we don't get anywhere near 132, they could get as many as they need, but it would be, again, the 5 residents on Hale would be allowed 3 initially each, so that would be 15 set aside for them. Then every other residence would be allowed 1 initially to give themselves 3 parking spots per residence, technically with including their garage. And then after that, if we had not reached that 132, then it would be on a first-come, first-served basis on that wait list to get the additional parking permits.
And that's why we feel it's really important that we have this $50 administrative fee, and that would take into account the staff time, the signage for Public Works, not only to make the signage, but to install it, and then also to make sure that, in case they need to repair them, but also to pay for stickers and other stuff. There also has been concerns, especially off of Chase Avenue, off of Donna Court, that there was a resident who was running an auto repair shop, and a lot of those residents were complaining that he or she was parking those vehicles on the street. That's why we feel it's really important, since there's 354 units and only 130 spots, that, you know, people don't overtake parking permits so other people can't get them. So we feel that the $50 is more than appropriate, considering it would be less than 14 cents a day to park, which anyone who in that area has gotten a parking ticket, the minimum fine is $25, which some of them stated they got in 4 days, which is double what the annual cost would be. And then also, too, in regard to that, it's significantly less than what we heard from all the residents, the monthly fees that their associations are charging them. So that's why we feel that it's a fair administrative fee, and it's a necessary fee to prevent people from saying, I need 6 parking passes that don't need them. We need to make sure, and that's why we want to do a slow rollout, to make sure that everybody who needs them gets them. Yes, we're very confident that we think we can fit everybody based on what we've seen over the Thanksgiving break. However, as Christy brought up, we don't want some people to say, well, now since I can park on the street, I'm going to use my garage as a storage space, so I want to park there. As I said, what I mentioned, and that's why I highlighted it, we believe this is a lasting solution, but this also has to be reasonable, and that's the reason why we feel that it is necessary to impose this administrative fee for all the reasons that Rob and I stated.
Was it grandfathered every year then? Like if they get a permit this year, automatic renewal? I'm just thinking like if people like moving in and out, will they have a chance to get a parking spot?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Trustee Gansey, and that's why we wanted to do this slow roll, knowing that some people would move out and some people would move in, knowing that families would grow. Like, for instance, in my household, we started off where we had 2 drivers, myself and my wife, and now we have, my daughter who's grown up and my son, so we wanted to take that into account too. So this is very well thought out, and as I said, I think that we are able to do this, but to answer your question, they would be able to renew. However, our recommendation would be is they would have to pay any unpaid parking tickets, and if there's some of the concerns that was expressed in the meeting about, what happens with the snowfall is anybody who violates that would potentially not be able to be renewed, because that's a part of the other administrative fee. It is going to be a little bit more work on Public Works to go down some of those side streets to properly salt and plow them if people don't move their cars.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the work you put into this. And, I'm glad we're coming up with a solution. Just one other comment, just trying to foresee what other people might say. I see how it stretches and there's some single-family residents there. Do we feel like there's gonna be a problem? It looks like one driveway backs straight out, onto the street. So if there's cars there, sometimes that's hard. I'm just wondering if we're
They
anticipating.
could already park there. This is only affecting 2 to 6 a.m. So cars can park there all other times of the day without restriction. This is only affecting 2 to 6 a.m., but they are already allowed to park there.
Okay, thank you.
Are they allowed to park at Metro from 2 to 6 a.m.?
Technically, yes, they can. They just need to move it before they do the snowplow operations. We've been seeing less and less people park in that Metro parking lot, and actually to the point where the permit parking's been reduced. So for the past few years, they've actually blocked off certain sections of the Metro lot so nobody parks there in particular.
So, thank you for addressing the concerns that I had with the village administrator. I appreciate that. The Metro lot that's by the water tower, one of the residents mentioned at the last meeting that it's pretty torn up, and I took a drive out there last weekend, and it looks pretty bad, so I don't see Dan here. Is that going to be addressed? Oh, hi, Dan.
It's part of the
We're
capital,
taking-
that's part of the capital budget
In
conversation.
the capital budget?
So it is on the list.
It's on the list. Will the households who aren't here, is there a plan to notify them of this opportunity?
Yes, so if approved at the next village board meeting, if this gets approved, we will be working with GIS and Christie's team in Public Works to do an educational campaign. We will put out the messaging on our social media pages, working with the associations, the Bartlett Greens 1 through 6, and putting different paperwork on people's cars, how people go about to apply for these permits. We will just also make sure that we have a transition period if this goes through where, we're just like any ordinance that we have, where there's a grace period before we would start to do our ticket enforcement.
Where should people park when there's 2 inches of snow? Because if it's an issue right now and they're not allowed to park on the streets when there's a 2-inch snow.
We discussed that, Trustee LaPorte, in our staff meeting. So we feel that's going to be few, far in between. I mean, currently, right now, if there's 2 inches of snow, Public Works, I talked to Dan about it, is we have to maneuver around those vehicles no matter where they parked.
Okay.
So we feel between the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., it's going to be very minimal potentially for that snowfall happening and us to use our, the resources. But that's where it's going to come into play, and that's why I'm really glad a lot of these residents are here to have this on record, that we need them to be a part of this solution. And when that happens, they're going to have to then potentially work with their homeowners association or find alternate parking so we can adequately plow and salt those streets. And if those people who refuse to move so, as I mentioned, the police department will be enforcing the over 2 inches of snow. And if those people get those tickets, there's a potential the next year, if they're looking to reapply, they may not be eligible to get those. As I mentioned, we need to all work together, not just the village board, Public Works, Police Department, but all the residents who are here to be on that same page. As I mentioned, this is the best solution that a lot of people have been waiting 30 years for. As I said, is a perfect solution? No, but I think it's the most reasonable and perfect solution we can come up with, and that's the reason why we need to do everything that we mentioned, including that administrative fee, because if we just open it up where anybody can just grab as many as they can, as I mentioned, there's 354 units. If you do the math, there's not going to be enough spaces, nor is the police department, or I believe the board, willing to extend this to other streets that don't have the multi-use housing, for the overnight parking.
Well, this is nothing new. If you've ever lived in the city of Chicago or you went to visit somebody in the city of Chicago, there's nowhere to park on the street. You have to circle blocks and blocks till you can find a parking spot. And then you find the spot and you have to have a special neighborhood parking permit to do that as well. So we're spoiled out here in the suburbs because we have more space, but if you go to the city of Chicago any given weekend, you're going to go through this, especially in the wintertime. Visiting relatives on holidays, it's a nightmare down there. And you have to walk 3 or 4 blocks to get to your party or wherever you're going, because you're not going to get Rockstar parking in front of your house unless you put your cones and your chairs out.
Yeah, we're hoping we don't have to go to a DIB system out here.
How are the spaces defined? Are they numbered?
No, it's going to be first come, first serve. And we have on the map, as Christie shows, it's only going to be on one side of the street. The only difference, Trustee Gunstein, is we do need to make some room to allow for the state statute and the village ordinance of 30 feet from the intersection. And that would address one of the concerns that one of the other residents brought up at the board meeting of pulling out onto the street to make sure it's safe, to prevent any type of safety issues from occurring.
I just try to figure out how many people during your review of the parking over the holidays were parked on actual Oneida. Just ballpark,
Yep, about 30 a night,
30, okay.
between 30 and 35 a night, so it was,
Is there enough spots on Chase and Hale to accommodate that, so Oneida would not be an on-street parking street?
No, I don't think that is reasonable at all. I think in order for this to work, we would need to have Oneida, and there's plenty of room on Oneida. One thing we did take a look at is that one resident's concern. And after thinking about it, I'm very troubled how that even would occur, because even with the cars parked on one side of the street, there's still 2 lanes of passing, so I don't even know how that was even possible when he alleged that, you know, he almost got hit head-on because there was a car parked there. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Is
there any,
I don't know, I just look at Oneida as a main thoroughfare through Bartlett, so it's, you know, for parking there wise,
We're going to try it.
try it and see.
Yeah.
any other questions? No?
Send it to board.
To the board.
I like it. Good
I really
job.
appreciate it. Thank you very much to all the residents who are here and showing their support and concern, and more importantly, thank you to you, Village President Wallace, and other Board of Trustees for listening to their concerns as well, too. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman
Kevin?
Swansky.
Sorry, could we just clarify?
Nope, we're done. They set it up, they figured it out, we're going to put it in action. No more discussion.
Do we get to comment now?
No, you can come comment at the board when we actually pass it. You had plenty of time to comment. This is live, this is on record, so if you were going to comment, you would have grabbed a packet online. I'm not going to go through this, not here. It's not in effect yet. We pass it at the next,
He said the guy got 5 tickets the night, over the past 2 weeks. He has to pay those 5 tickets, and then he has to pay $50 on top of those 5 tickets to go ahead.
He didn't say that.
She's got a handicapped
No.
girl. She's got 3 tickets. She
No.
should have to pay $150 to get a pass.
We are going to discuss it at the next board meeting as well when it gets passed. If you want to talk about it additionally, you'll have time at the town hall before that board meeting on the 17th.
Hey, I tried to talk earlier. You said I talked at the wrong time. What's the right time?
You could have talked right before, that's town hall. We're not gonna do this here.
I'm asking. You just told me that he came up with a plan and we were supposed to comment.
You said we would
That's
get a
what you
chance
said
to
to me.
speak
You said we would
afterwards.
have a chance to comment.
That's what
You
you
did have a chance to comment before
You
the,
said afterwards.
I said, go out and look at the agenda, and you can comment in town hall before we talk about permit parking.
That's not what you
That's
said.
not what you said at all. You can laugh all you want, but nobody knew what was happening. So how are we supposed to comment before
You said
when nobody knew what was
You
happening?
said
What
you
are
were
we
going to
supposed to
talk
comment
about
on?
it, let us know what
He
it
said-
was.
he
and
said
then we
He
have
said
a
a
chance
resident
to talk.
got 4 tickets in
Can I talk? Can I talk? Can I talk? Not at these board meetings unless it's town hall. I'm letting you now.
But you said you were going to give us a chance to speak after.
will have a
You told us what was going to happen.
No, that's at the next board meeting when we actually pass, when we attempt to pass it. You're gonna have another crack at this at the town hall meeting, the next board meeting that we have at the board level.
You passed it. That doesn't mean that then you changed it to attempt to pass. So you're already agreeing with the officers?
No, we discussed it right now, tonight. We discussed it tonight, then we'll discuss it again after there's a motion made to pass it, and before we do that, you'll have a chance to talk at the next town hall meeting.
Are we allowed to make any,
And all of the information on this is online.
are we allowed to make any options or offer any options to what you guys said today?
You certainly can at the next board meeting. It's not even in effect until the next board meeting.
Mayor, you know, I'm sure our,
The officers will be really happy to explain it out there too,
if they would like to make suggestions directly to staff, that's fine too.
directly to staff.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Is this, until you guys pass it, are we still extending this?
Yes.
No signatures?
Yes. And there'll be plenty of officers out in the hallway to discuss the details of what we just discussed. Thank you, Chairman SUWANSKI. Building and Zoning, Chairman GUNSTEEN.
Thank you, President Wallace. We have two items tonight. Our first item is a code enforcement process. In the past year, residents have reached out to the village board members to voice concerns with code violations on adjacent properties as well as code violations notices that have been received. Staff will be explaining the procedures that the village's two code enforcement officers follow for every complaint that is received from the public or initiated by staff. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy Stone.
Thank you, Chairman Gunstein. I'm going to try to walk us through this pretty briefly. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt.
Can you just pull your mic forward?
Sure. Okay. So we get complaints two ways. Either they're initiated by the public or staff initiates them when they're doing their rounds. We enter every complaint we receive into our online tracking system, which is great because then I can pull up reports and track activity measures from that. Our inspectors do an initial inspection. They will typically knock on the door to see if the homeowner's there to talk to them about whatever violations that they see. They will give a notice of violation on the property when they're there. They'll either hand it to person, they'll post it because they have the printers in their car. We typically give 7 to 14 days before we do a reinspection. Sample notices are attached in your packet. The inspectors go out there, do a reinspection. If it's corrected, that's the end of the case. It's closed. If it's not corrected, then we issue a second notice of violation. This is their final notice. We give them another week or two to comply with whatever outstanding issues they are. They are hand-delivered, posted to the property, or mailed first class. We always try to hand-deliver so that our code officers can talk to people and get it addressed that way so there's no miscommunication. They do include their phone numbers. We do encourage people that receive these notices to talk to staff. We work with people if there's certain things that are going to take a longer period of time. We do work with them and extend those deadlines very frequently. When they've done their final inspection, if it is not corrected, then we issue an administrative citation for local adjudication. So they are given a ticket and a letter letting them know of the court date. We have now, since we had the complaint that when this was brought to our attention earlier this year, we have added a sheet that kind of explains the local adjudication hearing procedures. So we send that along with our notice as well, letting them know that the hearing officer is there explaining some of the language, that they're able to bring a legal representative, but they're not required to. It's a very informal process, really. And our code officers typically, prior to the hearings, that day, they go to every property. They do another final reinspection. If the property is in compliance, they will tell the property owner they don't need to attend, that we are going to dismiss the case if we have compliance at that point. When it gets to if it gets to having a formal adjudication hearing, our officers present the information. The person who received the ticket is given an opportunity to present their evidence as well. Very frequently, the adjudicator gives them a continuance. There aren't fines unless the person doesn't show up. Then there is typically a default notice they're given. They're given paperwork at that time, or it's mailed if it's a default notice, informing them that they can vacate that judgment by filling out paperwork. We've tried to talk, and our goal is always to obtain compliance. Our goal is not fines. However, when it does get to adjudication, we do recommend that fines be imposed, because this has taken typically months to get to this process with no compliance. It's taken significant staff time, the hearing officer's time. And typically the hearing officer, when he does levy a fine, he tells them, if you comply within the next month and come back, I'll reduce that fine, because our goal is always compliance. So we're trying to work with the property owners. And I know you do get complaints from people who get the notices, but there's also the other side of it where it's the neighbors that are complaining to staff as well. I honestly don't know why anyone chooses to be a code officer, because no one is ever happy to see you. You're hearing it from both sides. And so I just want you to know, I wanted to give you the samples of the letters that go out. I know that the adjudication notices are very formal, but they're legal, so that's why the language is probably slightly confusing. But our staff does talk to residents as often as we can to try to seek a resolution.
So,
Point out that over 90% of our complaints, those are resolved with compliance before a ticket is issued or before local adjudication, 90%.
Let me ask, what, if you had, what's it like the number one complaint that you get?
If we cite someone for garbage cans in their front, then they will go out and they will drive around the village, and then they will give us a list of every address that they can find with garbage cans. So that one really seems to be driven up by the fact that people like to then get other people for the same violation.
Garbage.
So the numbers are a little distorted on that.
first violation gets 7 to 14 days to be compliant.
Yes.
After 7 to 14 days, they reinspect non-compliance, they get another 7 to 14 days.
Yes.
So in 30 days or less, they are compliant, or they have to go in front of adjudication for their fine,
So after they've gotten their second notice of violation,
with no money, no monetary.
no money, we go out a third time. At that point is when we issue the ticket. So we're 30 days out, we write the ticket. You have to give them 15 to 30 days. We have a time window, so they still have another 15 to 30 days before they have the hearing date to bring it into compliance to that.
Basically, the second time you're out there is basically a reminder
Yes,
them to become compliant before this gets to be a fine.
yes.
Okay.
But let's say the first notice is, he goes out there on the 7th day. He issues the second notice, and then he comes back 7 days later for the second notice. So that's only 14 days.
It depends on what the violation is. If it's something simple like where your garbage cans are located, you should be able to move your garbage cans in about a week. If it's something where we're saying your fence is in disrepair and needs to be removed or replaced, we'll work with them, give them a longer time. You have to find contractors, you need to get bids. So it's a case-by-case basis.
I move my garbage cans every week to the street.
So
Anything else?
I think the issue is when the code officer goes out there, and obviously someone complained to me, and this is an isolated incident, maybe an isolated, I don't know, but they were told that they had to remove the stuff from their front yard. So they put it in their backyard. So when the code officer came back, I don't know what notice it was, he said, no, you're not compliant. So I don't think there was clear expectations what was laid out for her or him to do. Then, on top of it, no one should be fined $500. Was it a $500 fine?
I believe it was, but the hearing officer makes his own decisions when it comes to the fines.
Well, I mean, that's something that is up to the board discretion. If something goes on past a year, that's one thing. But a $500 fine, I could go around this village and point out plenty of other fines that should be levied versus something like this. I mean, this is crazy.
I believe the $500 fine for this instance was issued when the person failed to appear. So they were issued the $500 fine. I filled out the paperwork with them to vacate that judgment, to have a new hearing. Our code officer said, I do think there was miscommunication for that instance, so we had no problem continuing that case, and that's what was done. So then she did appear at the following hearing.
So if someone doesn't come to the hearing, they get a $500 fine?
It's up to the hearing officer. What the fines are anywhere from $25 to $750. They can be fined per day if the hearing officer wants to go that route. It is up to the hearing officer.
But we set the 750 max as a board.
750 max per day, if that's how they choose to do it.
Let's just put it this way. If somebody gets a notice and they don't show up at a hearing, and we're paying that hearing officer $350 an hour.
Be there.
So you agree with, they should be levied $500?
I think that they should be warned that they're going to be levied $500 if they don't get into the hearing or fix it.
I think therein lies the problem. I go,
And I think that's what happened. They never did have to pay the $500 fine. That's what, they vacated it.
they vacated it?
Yeah, that judgment was vacated at the next hearing. So a new hearing
Exactly
date
what
was
happened.
assigned.
Need to get people's attention to show up.
And then at that point, it was all worked out, I believe at the hearing.
Yeah.
That judgment was vacated. She was given, I believe, another continuance to get the property. And she met with our officers. They scheduled a time to meet, said, this is where, what can you see? What do I need to do? And it was taken care of.
I don't know if there's clear expectations laid out when someone gets a fine on their door, like there will be a second notice, or there will be a third notice, or this is 7 to 14 days. Like, the general public doesn't, do they know that it's, 'cause right here it's written typically 7 to 14 days.
So the first notice says that we will do an inspection on or about a specific date. I personally don't want to say I'm going to give you you have, anywhere from, you have up to 30 days to actually fix the problem. So you don't want to say you have warning, warning, warning. There are certain circumstances where it's an immediate situation that we want to go straight to a ticket.
Absolutely.
So we need to have some sort of leeway with that.
I think
90% of the people get it, because we're 90% code compliant, they're
Exactly.
corrected. So the 10%, you're always gonna probably have 10%. I'm not a statistician, but there's probably gonna be 10% out there on any given day. And it sounds like you get 3 strikes and you're out. It's not like we're zapping them the first day. So everybody's gotta have a little equity in it.
7 to 14 days, go get a warning, the second 7 to 14 days. I do think, though, if it's a life safety matter, I think we need to not extend it and extend and extend it, which we have that in our ordinances. So, if anybody else has any questions on it, this is for reference and information only, so.
I think it's very clear on the things that we have in here, how the thing it works. And obviously, it's working with 90% of the residents, and 10% probably just don't want to be compliant.
Yep.
And there could be a certain percentage of those people that are just confused, and we can clarify that.
Right. Our code officers, we have the department line on there, and people do call. Sometimes they don't understand. I mean, getting code violations are in code language, so.
So when someone does call, how is that logged in the system?
So we have a note section that's for internal use only, so we can say, our code officers will write, I spoke to the resident on this date, they explained, this is the situation, I'm going to change my reinspection date until this date. And so we do work with people. Or they'll write a note, oh, they got a building permit, for, say it's a fence. They obtained a building permit on this day, so I'm gonna give them some time to get the fence built. So we keep notes in there, and then they change their follow-up inspection dates.
It sounds to me like you're pretty fair and reasonable about it. You work with the residents as much as you possibly can.
We're not looking to raise revenue, we're looking to.
Wouldn't want that job.
So, all right. That said, any other questions, concerns? All right. Second item is our petitioner requesting a special use permit to allow cheerleading training center, fitness and recreational facility at 810 East Devon Avenue in the I-1 Light Industrial Zoning District. The petitioner is also requesting a variation to reduce the required parking for the entire property from 186 to 147. The facility would primarily operate on evenings and weekends. This is for review before we send it to the Plan Commission. Is there any questions?
No.
Just fine.
I think the other businesses typically work during the day there, so this is a pretty good balance.
Correct. I think if we had applied the regulations that we have for the downtown overlay, where you look at the specific uses and their peak time, I don't anticipate this being a problem.
Yeah, is this vacant currently?
It is currently vacant. This will make the building fully occupied.
Very nice.
Do you guys have a diagram, or did you guys talk about the stacking of cars when people are getting picked up and dropped off?
We can have them prepare something like that for planning and zoning.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, also, how many kids will be here at one given time?
That was in there.
It's in there.
Let me see. That was in their cover letter, I believe.
it. 28.
Let me see. I thought we had that in there. It says 28 students on the site.
Okay.
So they anticipate no more than 35 spaces would be needed at a time.
All right. If nobody has any other questions, we'll send this off to Planning and Zoning for a hearing. Well, that's all I have tonight, President Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman Gunstein. Finance Committee Chairman Laporte.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm excited to announce we'll be discussing the proposed 2025 to 2029 capital budget. Lots of exciting things in here.
Steam just came out
Hand
of
it
it.
off to staff for further explanation.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Laporte. Tonight, we are going to talk about capital, and the main goal today is to discuss fiscal year 25-26, which would be in next year's budget, but we're also going to touch base on years 2 through 5 in the capital. If you go to, I'm going to jump right into water, which is on page 61 of the PDF. 62 is kind of the summary. Let's see. Yeah. All right, 62 has the summary of the 5 years. One thing I wanted to point out here, one thing you'll see in the 5-year program, one thing that we changed from what we've done in the past and based on our previous discussion a couple meetings ago about asset management, we assumed no additional revenues. So we wanted to maintain a minimum reserve balance based on the board's minimum reserves. So for general fund, water, and sewer, we said the lowest we want to go is to that minimum reserve. So you'll see in 25-26, we've pretty much tried to maintain the capital program for that. But then on out years, and I'll point this as I get through the various things, we started to trim items so that we could maintain that minimum reserve. So if you go to page 64, which is the water main replacement program, you'll see we did the big water main project this year on North and Oak. So in 25-26, we do not have planned to do water replacement because we're going to be doing a road program. And then in 26-27, you'll see the highlighted section, 700,000. That's what's available in order to maintain that minimum reserve is 700,000. We also do have below that 100,000 in lead service replacements. You can see that going on for the next 3 years. Based on our water meter replacement program, we've got a better number on how many lead services we have to replace, and we believe we can put a program together to replace those lead services. So you can see, and then by year 28, 29, unfortunately, if we keep the revenue source for the water fund the same throughout the period, we would not have a water main replacement program. I'll just mention that what we've been doing over the last few years on water main replacement, we did the Oak and North was about 2 miles of water main. That was $3.2 million. If you'll recall from our asset management discussion 2 meetings ago, we're supposed to be doing roughly 3 miles or about $5 million per year. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we should recommend us to be. Water tower painting on page 66. We do have the Stearns Road Reservoir scheduled to be painted next fiscal year. However, in 27-28, the Southwind Water Tower would be postponed if we were to maintain the current rates. The whole point behind this, and I'll get to that as we go through the capital budget, is at the end of this, we'll have a discussion on options or ideas that we came up to try to raise revenues to support the capital program moving forward, but we'll get into that. Just wanted to kind of focus on 25, 26, because we'd like that to kind of include that into the budget process as we move forward. But then in January, the plan is we'd be able to come back to the board after we've had that discussion on revenue ideas that you'd like us to pursue. We can come back and kind of show you how we can formulate the rest of that years, yeah, and service levels and all that years.
You're framing a very potential pitfall to cash flow for some of these projects.
That is the issue, is I think in the past, when we had this discussion, Paula, Tyler, Todd, and I, we've been putting a 5-year capital program of here's what we'd like to do. Unfortunately, we haven't had the funding to support that 5-year program. So what we're doing now is kind of showing you, here's next year's budget. We do have reserves and we do have funding to support the program for next year, but we don't for years 2 through 5 unless we do something to generate more revenue coming in. We kind of want to show you, here's what that program would look like if you didn't want to do any rate increases or any other revenue findings. Here's what we would be able to do, but if we want to, and we'll get into the option, but if we want to raise $1 million, we can do this and that type of thing. So we'll have that discussion kind of on the water, sewer, and general fund idea.
Before you guys explore different ideas for raising revenue, are you going to come to us for ideas first, or are you guys going to undertake your own ideas and then present it to us?
I think tonight is that, so we're going to present some options that we have seen and been looking at other villages that they are doing, but we'd love to hear, get your input. And that's the thought, is we get your input, see if there's any of the items that we put on there, that you would like us to pursue, and then that will give us time in January, and if we have to come back in February, to kind of put a program together based on, there might be something out there that we'd have to figure out, okay, how much will that generate, and what can we build with that? So through all of this, we'll be able to put a kind of a program together for years 2 through 5. Based on that revenue that you guys, that we discuss and kind of follow through with. So this is kind of just the beginning. It's the main focus is for next fiscal year, try to get that approved, and then have further discussions into January, February on the out years for the capital program. Continuing on with the infrastructure improvements on page 68. This is, we've had this on the list for a while. It's a new water tower. The reason that is in there is because the plan is to do an IEPA loan. So that turns into a loan payment, so there's not a big of a hit to the reserve fund. So that's why that's being shown. Again, we kind of have been pushing that back because steel prices and everything have been sky high. We're not really seeing those come down a whole lot right now. We're hoping that they will. At some point, we do need to build that water tower, and that's the whole discussion of Oneida, the removal of the Oneida water tower with the building of a new water tower. So those are kind of linked together. Water leak survey, we continue to do that to try to be proactive in trying to find leaks. We had a leak on Struckman today. You probably saw notices on that. Water meter change out, we continue to do that. We've got a large portion of that meter change out to happen next fiscal year. So it'd be May of 25 through April of 26, and then continue into the summer of 26, which is why we've got the 750,000 shown in the 26-27 fiscal year. removals, you'll see there, that's, we've got wells 7, which is a deep well with WRT treatment. We're looking to remove that, along with actually well 4. We'll be pursuing that as well. But, and then you'll see the Oneida Tower after the new tower was to be built. We have our hydrant painting program. That continues. That's been a successful project. If you've seen the new hydrants being painted, they look much better. One thing we did want to show, and hopefully I can get this switched over, during our asset management discussion, we had some discussion on how do we choose which mains to do, and we worked with GIS to kind of show you what we have available to us. So we've put together water main breaks over the last, you can see back to 2017. The total at the top, 2017, you can see we had 29, 2018 we had 30. This was prior to DuPage Water. Then we had 2019, 2020 is when we had that transition to Lake Michigan, which all the communities that went to Lake Michigan, when that happened, they all said, be prepared, you're going to have a lot of water main breaks. Well, you see, we doubled. We've come back down, but this year it seems like we're picking back up for whatever reason. But each one of these dots is a water main break. So you could kind of, and then what GIS was able to do is you can see, I don't know if you can see, we have put all, you can see the years. That's the year of the subdivision. So you can see like down in, this would be south, the Apple Valley area, south of Stearns. We've got a bunch of dots there. Those are mid-1970s. So you can see that's 50 years-ish. We said water mains should last about 60. So it kind of shows you that we're in that area. If I go up to the old part of town, you can see the dots there. A lot of that main is even older than the 70s, and we've been focusing water main replacements in that area. We've done some in that area south of Stearns as well, but it kind of gives you an idea of this is where we've been spending the money on water main replacements, and you can see why, because that's where we've been seeing the most of those dots. But as far as the 60-year life, it's kind of falling in line with what we're seeing based on when subdivisions went in. And that gets back to, if you remember that bubble from the 70s, 80s, and 90s when Bartlett grew, that's coming. And that's why I keep preaching. So, all right, let me go back. How do I get back?
And the numbers on the left are the amounts that we've spent on water main replacement since we began back at the same time, and we've replaced about 7.5 miles of water main with that $11.5 million. Just as a reference, we have 208 miles.
Any questions on water before I move on to sewer?
Why is it other communities warned you that you're going to have more water main breaks? What's behind that?
It's whenever you, for instance, in Bartlett's situation, if you recall, Elgin was where we were getting majority of our water from, which was on the west side of town. We are now getting it from the east side. So you have a change of flow, and every time you do a change of flow, slight pressure changes. We tried to get things dialed in as close as possible, but as soon as you make tweaks like that, and that's what the community said, is as soon as you hook up, it's going to be different, and your mains react differently, and that's where you seem to see the breaks. And we experienced that during that transition period. Things seem to have calmed down, but for whatever year, this year has been a little rough. Hopefully, we'll get back to the 30s is our goal. You're always going to have some, but we'd like to be in that 30 range. Any other questions on water? All right, sewer. So sewer, the same thing. What we're proposing, we would still have the Devon lift station force main project that's still to be completed. We hope to have that done by the end of this fiscal year. It could run into May depending on weather and whether they can get things paid, but majority of it should be done in this fiscal year. One of the things that we had to do in order to maintain the minimum reserve was basically trim about $1 million per year. The SSE program that we've been doing, which is where we do the sewer lining program, manhole lining, that type of stuff, is about $1 million that we've been dedicating towards that. So for right now, we're showing that being removed. However, we did keep the lift stations in, and we can go to that slide, which is on page 84 of the PDF. We've got a few lift stations still that are they're what they call a dry pit. So you've got the pumps down in the ground, usually 20 plus feet deep, where the guys have to go down into that to do any maintenance on the pumps or the controls. What we've been doing is converting those to submersible pumps where all the controls get brought up to grade, and you have a wet well where the pumps are there, and the guys don't really have to go down into the wet well. They have a chain where they can pull the pumps up, pull out rags, or do whatever they got to do, and drop the pump back in, much safer. So that's why we kept that as a priority as far as if we had to trim. We've been doing a lot of lining. We could take a break from lining if we had to and focus in on lift stations. So that's kind of what we were recommending on there. Next project is Bittersweet, which many of you saw we're done with, and I'm happy to report that we're on punch list items, and it should be done by the end of the month. Hopefully. Punch list items seem to lag, take some time, but we're working on it. We'll be done definitely by the end of the fiscal year. The last thing on sewer that is new is, if you'll recall, when we did the wastewater treatment plant, at the start of it, we had to trim things from the project. Those items that we trimmed still need to be done at some point, so we put them into the capital program to show that these are things that we still need to work on down at the treatment plant. Things like recently we had water damage at the control building. We had a mold remediation that was approved by the board, I think, last month. So we have some cleanup from there that we're working on and may need to do some more because we had anticipated using money this year for remodeling. Now we're putting it towards mold remediation, so we may have remodeling still to do next year. UV canopy was cut. That's just a cover over the equipment out at the UV controls. Basically provides protection for the guys when they're dealing with in the weather during emergency situations. Kind of protects the equipment as well. The big item is in the out year of 28-29, which is a second centrifuge. Right now, we have one centrifuge. We would have loved to have included it into the project. It's $3 million, so we were already over budget, so we were already trimming things initially. It gives redundancy, so if that centrifuge goes down, the only way, the centrifuge is where we dewater the sludge so that we can dispose of the sludge to the farm fields. So that's always coming in. We always have to get rid of it. If that centrifuge goes down, which it did, I think 2 years ago, we have to bring in a portable centrifuge or belt press at a high price, basically rent, and pay to have that sludge hauled away. If we had a second one, we can maintain one while the other one's operating and switch between the two. So that's what that is. That's all I have for sewer, unless there's any questions. All right, Tyler's going to take street. On the sewer side, let me see if I can pull up the sewer map. So just to give you an idea, we were able to, GIS was able to put maps together showing all of our sanitary sewers. All the red that you see on the map is all PVC pipe. All the blue that you see is clay pipe. And then all the multicolors are different years that we did lining. So you can see like the old part of town, we pretty much have lined that whole area, but we still do have quite a bit. If you saw where those water main breaks were, it happens to be in the same area where the clay pipe is because of the age. So it kind of gives you an idea that's where we're probably going to be spending most of our time over the next several years, dealing with water main replacement and sewer lining.
You keep flow meters on the sewage. Has the lining helped with your I&I?
So we don't have, actually this coming year, we're actually planning to do some flow monitoring again, just to see how well we are doing and see what impact it's had. We really hope that it has. We still see, we don't know because right now it's all going to MWRD. Once we get the Devon plant, we'll have a better idea if we ever get that flow. But we're going to get the information from MWRD and be able to take a look at how we've done.
And flow monitoring was part of that sanitary sewer rehab that is currently eliminated.
All right, we will go to streets.
Actually, do you want to pull up the web app?
Oh, yeah.
So while we have
While
another.
we have it, we'll just pull up the streets map. We had talked about the PCI, pavement condition index. And this is the evaluation we got back in 2019. The green is good, red is bad. Kind of shows you where we're at. Then if we go, the next time we evaluated it was in '22. So now you can see a lot of that red is gone and we've got green, but some of the green turned to yellow. Then in '23, this shows, if you see up in the upper left, that's the area we paved. It's now green. It was purple and red. So, I mean, we're kind of focusing our attention on those bad areas. And then proposed, I don't know if this is going to show, this is what we have scheduled for next year, which you can see the middle section is Amherst, which we had done the force main job. So we're looking to kind of take care of that in the courts in there. And then the other areas down in the Fairfax area, down in this area. So it kind of shows you we're addressing, we still do have some reds. We do have a lot of yellows, so that's our emphasis on putting more money into it because those yellows will become reds at some point, so we're trying to just stay ahead of it.
And so our current average, like we said, is 72, and we're on with our current budget that we have, a 38-year resurfacing cycle. And so to maintain that 75, one of them that we talked about, we'd have to get onto a 20-year. So this budget doesn't account for that. But just as a quick reminder, kind of similar to what Dan's been saying about water and sewer, MFT and the general fund, which funds street projects and other projects like stormwater and things like that, they're in a little better position, but it's still that similar to kind of borrowing from your savings account to pay for things, and the savings account is running low. So we don't have any major cuts in MFT or streets projects so far. So if you want to go to page 89, that kind of starts us off, and on 92 is the MFT program. So this alternates with water main. So you saw the proposed project locations next year. That is that first number, the 3.5 million for milling and resurfacing. And then our other general maintenance items every year is that concrete program, pavement preservation, things like that. Gonna jump ahead a little bit to page 96. That's the North and Oak resurfacing. This is, even though it's still resurfacing, this is done with a STP grant, which covers 80% of the construction cost. Those are federal dollars that are very strict on what roads they can be used for. So anytime we have an opportunity to use them, we do use them. And it would have been great if we were able to coordinate them to have them happen on the same time. But unfortunately, due to the amount of applicants that like Northwest Municipal and DuPage Mayors and Managers, for example, for the other side, gets, they are separated, but they are in the till. So North will be done next year. For bike path maintenance, the big one there is the Route 59 underpass, which we are hoping for grant funding for. We did apply for an ITEP grant. We will be reapplying for Invest in Cook by their recommendation next year once that comes out. But we won't know about the award status of those until about late spring next year. But design is underway, which is being paid for through Cook County's ARPA funds. And then more exciting parking news. Next year we don't have any parking lot improvements planned, but we wanted to make sure that we accounted for all our different municipal parking lots or public lots for the outgoing years. So now they're all listed. Then so the next three projects are kind of one and the same. This is the downtown sidewalk renovation, the Metro Depot improvements, and the town center improvements. So I'm going to kind of stick in the middle here to page 103 and 104. Because I just sat in on a design progress meeting with Metra. So currently with their plans to merge the platform, they are still providing us with that $150,000 grant. And they said to focus solely on the area around the Depot Museum, and they'll still allow that funding. And then anything we do around the Depot, they will match on the north side. So that was a pleasant surprise. Yep.
Like 60%, thank you. They're at like 60% engineering drawings for the platform change. So we've invited them to come and talk to the board about their progress and the plans for that.
This landscaping drawing, the north side is on hold until you meet with them.
It's on hold until they're done with their portion of merging the platform.
Okay.
So once the platform's moved, then they will do the north side.
They're going to do
the whole way across.
I got to assume they're going to take that platform out that's there.
Correct. And they're going to match the lighting to go down the whole way. They're going to extend the sidewalk, because obviously on that east side, there will be more parkers who park currently on the west side. They'll move over there. So, yeah.
I have a question. Rosika, is that ours or is that DuPage County's? Or are we just putting it in the budget just so there's something there?
Ruzika is, so it's ours. That's the one we have a lease with ComEd for the fields.
Okay.
Still in that lease renewal process, but.
Then weren't we supposed to were we going to try and annex something from DuPage County, or my memory is not?
Right, currently that the ComEd right-of-way is not in the village, so we would have to go through the DuPage County process. We're trying to pursue with ComEd annexing that area to the village, so we would go through our process, and then the goal would be in 26, 27, actually constructing the parking lot that we've talked about in the past.
Good foresight.
We try. So those were the big projects. Like I said, town centers included in there for the town center improvements that we showed before. Design's currently underway on that. I believe that's also at about 60% complete right now. So we'll be meeting with them soon to go over that. So if anyone has any questions on the street projects.
The sidewalks. So we did something experimental in front of Moore Brewing. Did it take off? Is that the route we're going to go going forward?
I believe so.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Unless everyone hates it.
Right, next year, or the project that's in there right now is the one that's in conjunction with Town Center and Metra, is picking up from Moore, heading east to Main Street, and then south down to basically the fire barn.
And then those corresponding years after that are kind of doing the rest of it throughout the downtown as budget allows.
But the concrete versus the pavers was successful. Yeah.
With
the concrete.
Ribbon.
Yes.
Awesome. All right.
Seems to be.
For the areas that are not getting redone for sidewalks, are we able to just fix what's here and re-level so that it's usable?
Yes, we've been going through
Those
and
areas?
doing that each year,
There's no sense in ripping them out if we can just repair them and buy us a couple of years.
especially in the areas, like, we won't probably spend a ton of time unless it's a big trip hazard on the area that we're gonna renovate, but south of there, all the way down the Devon, anything that needs to be touched up, we can touch up.
All right, if nothing else, the economic development projects, those are the TIFs, which are our standard work that we have to do in there soon. Lake Street will also be added into those. So in the interest of time, unless someone has a question on those, I'm going to move to golf.
I did have a real quick question. The Bartlett Town Center work, when are those plans due in for us to review? For the fountain and all that?
We're gonna be meeting with them shortly, in a couple of weeks, and then we could bring they're at 60% design as we're coming up to. We could bring that. We're basically following the concept that we had shown last year, I guess it was. Just getting final details on some of the stuff that, input that you provided during that time, and we're going to see in a couple of weeks what that looks like, and we'll modify it from there. But we could bring it back to the board if you'd like to take a look at that.
Who's doing the design work again?
Christopher Burke.
Are we good? Then, so jumping to page 114, for golf projects, the irrigation system is complete. They are doing, for the next few years though, it will be projects like parking lot seal coating to keep that fresh, cart path replacement over the next few years, and then well pump repairs for the well pump that has passed its useful life.
I had a couple of questions on the golf. There's going to be a roof that's needed there, correct, at some point? Or the building? What? A roof?
We evaluate the roof every other year. Right now, it's still okay, but it is getting older. And at some point, when we do an evaluation, we'll be told that we do need.
Think it'll last past the 27, 28 time period?
We'll have to do another evaluation. Based on the last evaluation, we were told it's still okay.
And then, is Public Works able to do the cart pass in lieu of hiring that out, so we can do it in the off-season?
Yeah, our crew could definitely do the paths, yes.
Okay.
That would be the plan. Obviously, 25,000, if it's just us buying materials and that, we can get more done than if a contractor were to come in.
I'll buy the beer.
You're going to send Ray up on the roof to do the,
Yeah.
do the report?
Inspection?
I'm not going to be Santa. When I looked at the cart paths, I can't find this here, cart path replacement. The red is the cart path replacements, correct?
Correct.
Right, Scott? Correct. Yeah. We need to take a look at, from 11 going to 12 also. And right at 18 by the pond, we've repaired that a couple of times. And I don't know what the situation is there, but just right by the drop area. Yeah, just that little area there.
And between 3 and 4, and between 4 and 5. It's a little rough.
Can't help it, I know the course.
Can we just put shock
I know what I'm
absorbers on the
talking
carts
about.
instead?
I think Trustee Daney would like a cart path that connects his house to number 14, too, in the back through the woods.
Yeah.
You know, if the ball was in the fairway, you wouldn't be on the cart path.
Time out. It can't cut through the cemetery. I want to stay away from the cemetery.
All right, is that it?
We got one more, which is kind of our catch-all of other, which is our stormwater projects, which includes, and this is on page 126, Country Creek, which design was approved a few meetings ago, so that's happening currently. But that's the big ticket item as far as stormwater goes. Other ones for next year, we're looking at lining some corrugated metal pipe underneath West Bartlett Road. And then our regular storm sewer maintenance and replacements that we do in-house. And then later on down the line, other major culvert replacements like Newport Boulevard, more proactively so we don't have an issue like Munger Road. And then the Schick Road Bridge, this is still under the 6-month inspection requirements. And right now, we're hoping to obtain special bridge funding to complete the construction on that, but currently they are funded out through 28, 29, so that's why we're still applying for it every year, hoping something happens. And then we're working on design, just so that if the event comes, we'll be ready for it. And then municipal building improvements, just like all the other assets we've talked about, our facilities need to stay maintained. So right now, we're doing HVAC replacement, which will bleed into next fiscal year, so that's why there's the split. The Village Hall is almost 20 years old now, so there are interior improvements need to be made. So we have things like carpeting, the wallpaper, maybe cameras for
Adam wants a
board
new chair.
meetings.
Trustee Hopkins would like a new chair.
We can see if we can work that in.
I got a guy.
And then that also includes security improvements. And then as our public works complex ages in the out years, looking at what we can do to best utilize that space. And that's pretty much it as far as what I had, unless anyone had any other questions.
And then I was going to get into the funding options. If
That's what I was just going to ask.
you're good.
Get somebody to sponsor the water towers, like United Airlines or Coke. Seems to work for the stadiums. Jack Daniels.
Yeah, I know. So over the years, we've talked about several different things, so we wanted to kind of throw some of these options out there that we've been kind of looking at from other municipals and things we've talked about. We'll start with the water and sewer side of things. Obviously, there's a water and sewer rate increase that can be done. Some of the discussions we've had with the board is an industrial, commercial rate versus a residential rate, kind of separating that out a little bit. The concern that we've had with that is that the majority of our revenue comes from residential, about 80% comes from residential, and 20% roughly comes from the industrial, commercial, and large residential. So we kind of wanted to put together an idea, show you kind of what the impact is. So if we were looking at a 4% across the board rate increase to all areas, kind of our current rate system do a 4% increase. We took a large industrial, small restaurant, a large residential, which could be like the Clear Oaks, right? And then a car wash, a mobile home area as well. So a 4% increase, you can see this is on a monthly bill. Large industrial, it's a $3,000 per month increase, $15,402. If we were to say we're going to keep residential flat and put it on the industrial, commercial area, that would be a 20% increase to that entity. And you can see the increase in order to get that same amount of revenue and not affect the residential. That's the impact to those customers. And this is just 4 of them that we just wanted to give you an idea of what that means. So the large industrial, that's a $15,000 per month increase. Small restaurant, they'll see a $76 per month increase, $2,000 and $1,000. Just to give you an idea of why we have to be careful if we were going to try to put more of the revenue source on industrial, commercial type area, the impact, because it is such a small portion compared to the residential. So we just wanted to be able to share that with you. Now, there's obvious options. You could do a 2% residential, and and we could. Those are the type of things we would want to hear from you. Is, well, how about if we did X% increase, and then put a larger increase on, if we said 2% on residential, and then what would that look like for the industrial and commercial? We can run those numbers. Just we would want feedback on what you would want that to look like, and then we could try to run those numbers.
What other communities are doing, what have they been doing for decades, and what are we doing? So we get a fair, look at what other municipalities have done.
Right, we actually, timing-wise, we actually just got from the DuPage mayors and managers. They do surveys all the time, and they actually just gave us a survey that was completed that shows not only water and sewer rates, but every other revenue, sales tax, you name it, revenue source that other communities are doing, and it's most of the DuPage County municipalities. So we can share that, I think, and from there, I mean, that can generate. We just got it today, so it was like perfect timing. It was like, so there'll be some new ideas from that even that we would be able to generate. Let me go back. So. You see that? It's kind of small, but I can enlarge. How do I go?
I think it was on the internet, on the web browser. Yeah, there it is.
Here it is. All right.
There we go. I'm not sure why.
From current slide. And then I can go. That's a little better. Okay. Some other communities are using a higher rate for high use. This would be like a lawn watering fee. So if your average user is using 6,000 gallons on a normal use, but then during the summer they use 12,000, you can set a limit of, if you use more than 10, for instance, you're going to pay a higher rate. It would bring in, we'd have to run the numbers. It's not a huge revenue source, but it's another revenue source that would generate some income to go towards the capital program or, the funding. So it's just another idea. Home rule sales tax increase. We did that, I don't know how long it's been now, but we're getting about, if you'll see it below in the general and MFT funds, 1% is getting about $3 million revenue, so that's a source that would be able to be utilized. We could divvy that up between general fund, water, sewer, however we want. That's an avenue. One of the discussions we've had is the capital improvement surcharge. There are towns, I know Trustee Hopkins has brought this up as far as on the utility bill, separating out like an operating fee versus a capital fee. There are some towns that are doing that where you would basically, we would probably want to get a consultant to come in and kind of do a water and sewer rate study so we can actually set those operating fees and then a capital fee. But what we would be looking at, something like that, is when we bring a 5-year capital plan to you, we would want to lock in that capital rate for that 5-year to cover the costs of that capital program. And then you would set the rates and you would have that rate set in for that 5-year capital program, essentially. There's also cross-connection control program fee. That's your backflow device. There's several, if you have a lawn irrigation system, residents have to get that inspected annually. Just about every sprinkler, every commercial building, industrial building, they have it if they have a sprinkler system. It's an annual program where they have to have a plumber certify that it's functioning, but we manage that right now. So we could assess a monthly fee basically to cover our cost for managing it. We do have a company that helps put all the letters out notifying, hey, your backflow device is due for its annual inspection. So that fee is fairly small, but it's something that this again is it's not going to balance the budget, but it would be another revenue source to help cover some of the costs that we have. On the general and MFT fund side, we talked about the home rule sales tax. An item where more and more towns are going to is stormwater fee based on impervious area. If you'll recall, a couple weeks ago when we talked about asset management, stormwater is in our system where we have ponds and storm sewers all over town. It's currently not funded. It's funded through the general fund. If you look at our capital, we have that in the capital, but it ends up getting put into our street budget, being paid for by the general fund. So do we want to try to generate revenue to help cover those costs? The large box culverts that we talked about, like Munger Road, Newport, those type of Country Creek, those type of projects would help fund, this fee would help fund that program. And then there's also a local MFT gas tax, which would essentially be at our gas stations that are in town. We can assess X cents per gallon that's sold, and that revenue would come to the Village of Bartlett.
When would you put together to show like what the estimate would be from each of these ideas?
So from here, if you like all these ideas, you want to see kind of the revenues that can be generated, we can do that. If there's some on here that you don't like and we want to just cross off, that's kind of the feedback we would want now. And then from there in January, February is when we would bring these back and say, this item like the local MFT gas tax, that's actually in this due page of mayors and managers thing I was looking at this afternoon. Some towns already have it, but I don't know like how many gas stations they have and how many gallons of fuel they're selling per year. So that's information that we don't have right now. But if that's something that the board is interested in, we'd have to get that information.
I like the capital improvement surcharge because everybody uses the water, everybody uses the sewer, so everybody should kick in a little bit to maintain that. That's my logic. And then the motor fuel tax fund, or tax, that'd be good because you're capturing the people that use it locally, but you're also capturing it from people that are just passing through. So I think those two would be ones I'd like to see. I think everything else, you're just kind of nickel and diming people. Just do it one across the board for everybody. We all use the water, we all use the sewer, we all need to pay for the infrastructure.
Every resident?
It all comes at a cost.
Every resident? The residential too?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I don't know, if industrial is more work for public works, then they should pay accordingly. I don't, I don't know that it needs to be double, but, you know.
How much time do you guys spend on the sewer odor issue over there? Seems like quite a
More
bit.
than we'd like.
That's really covered by the fines that we've been assessing, but it comes and goes. I mean, now people aren't outside, so we don't usually get it during the winter, but come summer, when people are trying to be outside, if that odor is still there, we are looking at other avenues to try to help with that situation. But yeah, we've spent quite a bit of time on that. But as far as in general, like on water use and that type of thing, typically we don't spend a lot of time. It's those pre-treatment.
There's water mains going out to Brewster Creek.
We've got 12 and 8-inch probably out there.
If a 12 or an 8-inch water main breaks versus one in a residential neighborhood?
Well, yeah, the supplies for a 12-inch versus, but I mean, if you're talking a clamp or digging a hole, that's really kind of.
The other thing, are there any consultants that could look at the additional revenue options? Maybe it's an accounting firm, or they know on a national level what municipalities have done in their area, what's been the most successful without really hurting the taxpayer. You know, maybe that's worth X amount of dollars to hire a consultant that does that and says, you know, looks at Bartlett as a whole and says, yeah, I think MFT gas and capital improvement, if you do it for 5 years, you'll have this much banked. I mean, I don't know that we're all qualified to make those calls.
Yeah. As far as water and sewer, yeah, that's where we talked about having someone come in and do like a full water and sewer rate study, and they could get into all the, you know, what they're familiar with as far as revenue options to be able to raise, and then they would also look at, we have the whole issue with the Cook County rate versus DuPage rate, Kane rate. They would look at all that. So if that's something that the board would like to pursue, that would be something.
Well, it seems like you got something in the mail today about the DuPage County. That's great for local, but it'd be nice if there was a firm that had the information for the whole country. So, oh yeah, there's a town in Arizona that's just like Bartlett, and this is what they did, and they've increased their funds, and the taxpayers are paying it, but it's not taken away from their groceries. It's not taken. Again, I think we're too localized. Let's look on a local scale and a grander scale.
I think if the goal is to keep the residential rate as low as possible, I think all those ideas that are up there have to go to pen and paper and see what the actual revenue increase is across the board. Because it might be a combination of a few of those, if that's the goal. And I don't think, like, to Trustee LaPorte's point, we can't see putting one of those into play until we know what the actual number is. You said the industrial rate or the commercial rate for water makes up 20% of our total revenue. So if that's an avenue we took and we chipped away at and made that, now it's 25% because we've increased that, and then we've added, you know, increased tax on gas or whatever it might be selected, we kind of want to see those numbers. I would like to see those numbers. So we know when making a decision collectively, these three options close the gap so we can keep our water mains replaced and our sewers lined.
That ultimately, for me, that's the goal, is to make sure that we have money in the bank to pay for what we need, and we're not caught with our pants down the road. Let's just start packing a little bit away. I'm conservative. Let's pack it away now so that long-term we've got it. Let's figure out something that benefits everybody so it doesn't, you know, we don't jack up the price of water, but maybe a little tweak here and there.
Were you expecting that it's going to be more than one of these solutions?
Most likely.
Okay.
It'll have to be.
I mean, because at some point we have to talk.
And there's
Taxes going away, right? So we're losing money there. So there could be.
Sorry. You're right. The grocery tax that we know from the state's budget, that will be going away. That's about $200,000 that we will no longer receive. One of the things that we talked about different ways to replace that. I think the home rule sales tax is a better idea than, the state says, oh, well, village, you can impose a grocery tax. Well, I think that hits our residents harder than some of these broader taxes. So I wouldn't recommend that we create our own grocery tax to replace the state one. I think this list, like Trustee Gunsteen says, or a combination of those things, so that it isn't just one source.
It's a 4-inch water main connection fee for a new development in Bartlett.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Just a rough idea.
Is it different than a residential?
Yeah, the larger the connection, the larger the fee, but admittedly, there's not many. So it's larger, but it's less of them.
Yeah. I just know I spent $60,000 in South Elgin for a 4-inch connection. And when I questioned it, I was told that I had to contribute to the building of a new water tower. So it was interesting.
Is that comparable to that, $60,000?
Some of those large buildings, Todd's saying, have been in excess of 100,000, so it sounds like it's at least comparable, if not more.
We are in the early stages of, every year I kind of do a water and sewer rate survey for surrounding towns, just to see, all right, standard, what's your bill? And I will say, if it helps, we're not alone in this issue, and many towns are seeing just the fact of the current state that, costs have increased. We still have to maintain these things forever. So now it's getting creative, raising rates, doing everything to maintain it forever.
Do we have examples like Elmhurst, right? Like they had older houses and then they were torn down. Like, do you have information like how they handled it? Like, did they have a problem there too?
As far as problem,
Or did
I would say they're in a.
What did they do for their options?
They raise rates. They raise rates. They have different revenue sources. It's, like I said, it's kind of, where I've looked into, almost everywhere is raising them.
I think we'll share that DuPage mayors and managers survey. Elmhurst was on there, so you'll be able to see all the different taxes, water rates, all that stuff that they have implemented. Schaumburg's on there. I think just about all of our surrounding communities are on there. So it was actually very timely. So it'll be helpful to look at. I wish I had it before this, but we just got it. So.
Well, I think putting the numbers
Let's
against.
land the plane here.
Yep.
So it sounds, at least if I could summarize, it sounds like we would like to do something to generate revenue, to have a more substantial capital program for years 2 through 5. We will try to put some numbers together on what these various items could generate, and we can share that. And then hopefully from there, we can start to develop the capital program. Like I said, our main focus right now is to get capital year 25, 26 approved. So I think we have time. If we were to say we want to put in next fiscal year a water and rate study, for instance, that's something we could work on for next year, but at least we could have the discussion with some of these revenue options.
I know it doesn't make a very big impact, but one thing that you said, Dan, made sense to me, because if somebody's using 20,000 gallons and somebody's using 5,000, that's more wear and tear on the whole system. They shouldn't be paying the same amount, because it shouldn't be the same amount per gallon. I would definitely support something that escalates at a certain point, a higher rate.
So I will tell you, I own a business in East Dundee. I was paying $13 a thousand. I got a letter in the mail that said over the next 4 years, there's going to be a 3.5% increase on your commercial water rate over the next 4 years. And it allowed us to prepare for it as a business. And it came as a shock, but it's the cost of doing business. It's easier to let a company know who's established here, and you can even say after the first year being here, it will go up after the second year. There's different ways to groom it, and again, it's only going to chip away at a small portion of it, but I would, in getting your numbers, I would like to see if you can find some data what other towns are actually doing or charging for those different size water maintain. Because it is a lot more wear and tear on our system. More flow, more wear.
We've talked about those multi-year ramping up, and it's something that we talked about with Trustee Gansey and Trustee Hopkins when we met, that, if we establish these year plans, then to provide, approve the ramping up all in one, so that we can give that information out so that people can plan. So it's not like a business gets hit with a different rate, for the upcoming year. Maybe they've got, other capital that they need to fix. So giving some advance warning, like we do when we have garbage rates, right? Garbage rates, we know that they're going to increase in, 2 years out or what have you, giving people that additional information. So that was something that we did discuss before.
You understand, anytime you raise taxes on a business, it is an impact tax on a person that uses that business. So it's going to be passed through at some point. But, as far as raising revenue quick, there's a lot of options up there. So hopefully you can find some.
Well, if there's no other questions, we can wrap it up and move on to the Public Works and Golf Committee.
So I pulled up the most recent industrial building permit that we issued, and for a 10-inch water connection was a little over $90,000, and for the 8-inch sewer was $35,000. I will be coming in January to look at some of our building permit fees. They haven't been updated in a while, and so that's another discussion we do have planned.
Raise our parking tickets.
Thank you, Chairman Laporte. Public Works and Golf Committee, Chairman DEYNE.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
You get 1 minute. Seriously, there's one person on this board that wanted to know about this. You have 1 minute.
Standard Public Works contract review. I'm not going to read everything. Tyler, you had it. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Kurt.
Yeah, this is Kurt.
Oh, I turn over to Kurt.
So we did review the standard public works contract that the village has been using. Overall, it's very comprehensive. The main concerns that we always want to look at for any public works contract is insurance and indemnification. It's a risky project. Public Works always has a little bit more liability risks. That's very good in what we have right now. The insurance requirements is very comprehensive. We're not going to be worried about that. The indemnification is very strong. I don't really see too much that we would need to change there. There are a few things that we would change just to kind of be consistent with some updates in the law. Performance and payment bonds, that's something that's required. It used to be anytime you spend more than $50,000, you were statutorily required to have them provide that bond. They raised that to $150,000 last year. So if there's some projects where we think the bond requirement might be inflating prices, it might not really be necessary, we can look at maybe not requiring bonds for a smaller project. Bid bonds are the same way. Sometimes for a smaller project, a bid bond might either increase the price too much, or trying to call a bid bond isn't really that effective. Sometimes the amount you're going to get back from a bid bond isn't really going to be worth the time and effort that it takes to fight about getting a bid bond from somebody. So that's one to look at, maybe for a smaller project where we don't have as much of a concern, we can waive the bid bond requirement. If we have a massive, significantly large project, we might still want to require a bid bond just so that we're not left having to go through that whole bidding process again. We can really try and force somebody to sign a contract. Mandatory pre-bid meetings. Pre-bid meetings are always a great idea. Having them be mandatory and disqualifying a bidder because they don't attend, for smaller projects, may not be necessary. You might be eliminating some bidders that are going to come in with good prices just because they couldn't show up at your pre-bid meeting. The instructions of bidders, all that's pretty good. Competitive bidding is a pretty strict process. You are bound to take the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. It's not just something that we can make that decision based on our discretion. Like most other contracts, we do have a lot of the language in there that gives us at least as much discretion as the law allows. So that was all good. Certified payrolls under the Prevailing Wage Act, that's another one we might want to change. Usually, it used to be that every contractor had to provide us certified payrolls on a payment application saying, here's our proof that we complied with the Prevailing Wage Act, and you had to keep those payrolls for 3 years. They changed that, so now contractors upload them directly to the Department of Labor. We don't have to take them, we don't have to keep them. That's one we can change, just less administration on our part. Identification looked good, insurance. There's the means and methods provision in there. I know that's one that's come up. So that's standard in every single construction contract. It's in all of the standard AIA, which is the American Institute of Architects. They have a standard contract that's used by almost industry-wide. The engineering standard contracts, they all have that in there as well. It's really not saying you can go carte blanche and do whatever you want. You still have to comply with the specifications, you still have to comply with the deadlines and things like that. But the way that the law treats it is if you retain control of the means and methods of, I want to see 5 people here on this day in this type of truck, bringing this type of, pipe in, that means that you're taking responsibility for the job site, you're taking responsibility for how they're operating, and you're taking on the liability as well. So if they do something negligent, if they're not being safe, you've assumed that duty to the public and to those workers as well. That's why that means and methods exclusion is included in the contract. It's really to protect the village from taking on any additional liability. Again, they still have to meet our specifications, they still have to meet our deadlines, but that's really a risk-shifting provision to protect the village there.
So, question, real quick, this is probably the only reason it was brought up. In the event that the village public works department sees something that work does not look like it's up to snuff, right? Is there a provision in that contract that allows us to hire independent inspectional service to remedy that, which does not put us on the hook for the liability?
So we can always do inspections. That's something we have the right to do. We will always inspect the work before we make payment to make sure that it's conforming to the specifications.
So if they go out and somebody was
that.
supposed to put a copper line in for a water main and they put a PVC line in, you can stop them, we get somebody out there to do an inspection.
They'd have to, again, that's because the specifications are going to say it has to be this type of line. So that's part of the, I guess what we'll call the supplementary general conditions. That would be part of that contract. The means and methods is saying, we don't say you have to have these 5 guys installing that copper line in this way at this exact time. That's really what you kind of delegate to the contractor. You've said you can do this within this time frame, within the specifications. After that, we leave it to you. We can always inspect and make sure that the work's conforming.
We do. I mean, every project we have, we either have on-staff inspectors or a consultant helping us. So every project that's out there is being inspected to make sure it meets our standards. So.
We keep a retainage. That was another thing I mentioned. I mentioned in the memo. We keep a retainage to make sure that they do complete, any changes and make sure that there's any non-conforming work, that we're still having some funds that we're withholding that we won't pay until final completion and final closeout. And then it did have all of there's, I don't know, maybe 15 or 16 different certifications that anybody that's working for a public agency has to attest to, drug-free workplace, sexual harassment. There's a litany of them. We have all those in there. We're really covered on that end. So overall, I don't have too many substantive changes. There's some tweaks that we'll make to just kind of make sure that it's consistent with current law and maybe give us some more flexibility and make some decisions on a project-by-project basis about when we might need bonds, when a mandatory pre-bid meeting might be necessary. But overall, very comprehensive.
I think this got brought up, obviously, by me. I was concerned with the water main project. I did speak with Dan Dinges about some growing pains and things like that. I don't think the industry standards were really followed on that project. I mean, there was gravel strewn all over the place. There was holes that were dug. They weren't filled in properly. So maybe it's internal controls on our end, or is it something that you write in the contract to make sure they follow industry standards? We don't have to go into it today. Obviously, some of the issues that were brought up about that project. I just want to make sure these problems don't happen in other neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know whether a tighter contract can help with that.
That's on us. We'll make sure that we do a better job of making that contractor, at the end of the day, he's supposed to clean up. Holes are supposed to be filled or covered, make the site safe, make sure they're keeping clean. Some contractors are cleaner than others, so you have to stay on them. So we'll make sure that in future projects that we're on top of that.
Is there like a service level agreement in those? Like contracts, like I don't know, like when I have contracts for work, there's like a service level agreement of like what we can expect, or if something's wrong, or.
That's all worked out at the pre-construction meeting, so we'll set our expectations, here's what we expect, and then it's just for us following up to make sure daily that we're on them, to make sure that they're actually following through with what they said they would do, so.
And there's usually provisions in every contract about, cleaning up the job site after the work. And if there's specific issues for a larger project, we can always write something in. If it's a real concern for that project, we can always include something additional.
And if they're not, sometimes, our people are out there telling them, and then they're not following through, or you have to keep nagging them, we can shut them down and say, look, until you get this corrected, you're not proceeding, and we'll utilize it. We hate to do that because it slows the project down, but if we have to, we will.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you, Mr. President. That's
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Moved by trustee Daney, seconded by trustee Laporte. Will clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Daney?
No, I mean yes.
Yeah.
Gansey?
Yes.
Gunstein?
Yes.
Hopkins? Laporte?
Yes.
Swansky?
Yes.
We are adjourned.